The 1920s were a time of wealth and wonderment in America, and riding high on the success of its second industrial revolution, the economy was booming. Until now, electricity was mainly used in factory systems, automating the process and cutting out the need for human labor. Yet suddenly, it was being branded for consumers. The prospect of commercial electricity sparked the imagination of many, prompting the cover of the 1923 August issue of Practical Electrics, showcasing the electric haircut of tomorrow. I'm Bailey McKenna, and in this slidecast, we'll take a look at how people in the 1920s imagined the future of personal hygiene in an electrifying world. Before we get to the haircut of the future, we take a trip back to the 1900 World Fair, where Jean-Marc Cotte was tasked with creating a series of images featuring how the world might look in the year 2000. The 1900 Exposition Universelle was nothing less than extraordinary. Held in Paris from April 14th to November 12th, it recognized the developments and achievements of the past century as well as our progress into the next. Nearly 50 million people visited from around the world to see the fantastic machines, inventions, and architecture that had revolutionized the 19th century and those that would transform the 20th. Such inventions included the escalator and movies with synced audio called talkie. In addition to these, other major breakthroughs were debuted at the fair, including the introduction of the diesel engine by Rudolf Diesel and the Great Exposition Refractor, the largest refraction telescope at the time. While these innovations drew the attention of millions, the main attractor was Le Palais de l'Électrique, the Palace of Electricity. This was the most important attractor at the fair, not only because it had aesthetic appeal, but because it provided energy to the rest of the exhibition. The machinery required to do this attracted the masses, marveling at the grandeur and sophistication of a human accomplishment. In addition to providing energy, the pavilion featured over 5,000 multicolored incandescent bulbs which illuminated the palace as a center point of the fair. To commemorate the fair, French artist Jean-Marc Cotte was commissioned to create a series of images featuring what the world might look like in the distant future. The result was a series focusing on machines that automate our lives. The newfangled barber, pictured on the left, and Madame at her toilet, on the right, are two pieces which showcase ideas of personal hygiene and grooming in the year 2000. By looking at these two images, we can begin to understand just how society perceived technology, particularly electricity and its applications. In the newfangled barber, mechanical arms clip away while the barber controls the robotic arms. While the task is being performed by the machine, it is still being controlled by the barber. We run into a similar case in Madame at her toilet, where she controls her contraption through a series of levers and knobs. Again, while the machine performs the action, it still requires her direct input to operate. While these predictions about the future of automated personal hygiene were wildly inaccurate, they make sense based on the context at the time, a time where machines required a human touch to operate. Thus, it feels like the machines are mere extensions of their arms, which in my opinion seems to defeat the purpose of automation. But this just goes to show how little we actually understood. Society didn't quite get how this whole electricity thing worked, and for most, it assumed almost magical properties. One such example of these properties is embodied in Dr. Satan's electric belt. This outrageous contraption promised a cure for everything from impotence to exhaustion when all else had failed. If that seems ridiculous, it's because it was, at least from a present viewpoint. But at the time, we lacked a fundamental understanding of electricity and its properties. So to fill in the gaps in our knowledge, we got creative. There were, however, useful products, such as the electric vibroshave, promising, quote, the smoothest shave you've ever had in 30 seconds. At the time, this was revolutionary, especially when you consider shaving technology up until this point. This usually consisted of straight or single-blade safety razors, both of which are very difficult to use. If we look at an image of the actual vibroshave, you'll notice it's very reminiscent to electric razors that we have today. It features the same oscillating teeth that we see in modern razors as opposed to the traditional single blade. As you can imagine, this was met with a great deal of skepticism, particularly in the early 1920s, simply because nobody understood exactly how it worked. To clarify, when I say nobody, I mean the general public. Of course, there was an engineer who designed the product and understood the principles behind it. However, the population had no knowledge of this whatsoever. We take these concepts for granted since we've understood them since grade school, technology such as electricity and magnetism. Yet in the 1920s, this was just being discovered. This can be used to help us understand the haircut of tomorrow and how we came to this idea of the future in 1926. Strangely enough, electricity serves a different purpose than that of the vibroshave. Rather than operating a machine to aid the barber, electricity simply stands the client's hair on end for easy cutting. While this does show a greater understanding of electricity and its principles, it still shows how little practical knowledge we had in applying the technology. If we look closer at the image, you'll notice that the wires coming from the generator are draped across the sink. Now, anyone living in the 21st century with a clear head would immediately point that out as a significant danger, but in the 1920s, this wasn't understood. It all goes back to realizing that this was a bleeding edge technology at the start of the century and had been studied very little. Besides highlighting a lack of functional understanding, the magazine cover offers insight into some of the concerns that were held once electricity became commercially available. This goes back to the automation of factories throughout the Second Industrial Revolution. The fact that the barber is not using electricity to power a tool or do work emphasizes the role that he plays in the process. Electricity is not doing the work, the barber is, and this further projected the concerns of job loss due to automation in the mid to late 1920s. While what I've said about this image is true, there's an even larger reason as to why the haircut of tomorrow does not feature electric clippers. The fact is, in 1926, they did not exist. Barbers cut hair with razors and scissors, so how would they arrive at a magic pair of hair clippers? They can't. It's easy to see the trajectory of technology after the fact. However, in its conception, there is no way to tell. Unfortunately, 10 years later, there were no electrified haircuts, only the electric clippers we know today.